My name is Karyn Callahan. I'm the course coordinator of the Bachelor of Early Childhood Studies course here at Charles Sturt University.
And I'm Randa Qatar, and I work with Karyn on the Bachelor of Early Childhood Studies program here at CSU in Burlington.
And we are really delighted that our Ministry of Education has released an Ontario's Pedagogy for the Early Years document. It's called How Does Learning Happen? It is very consistent with the things that we have talked about in our program and that we've explored with students, because it articulates a view of the child, a view of the educator, and a view of the parent. And that's very rare in these kinds of documents. Very often, of course, there is a perspective under these documents, but it's rarely articulated. So for this ministry to have the courage to come right out and say, here's how we view children and teaching and learning is a remarkable, we say an advance, remarkable development in thinking that's going to challenge us and that's going to put us on, we think, a very, very positive track.
And it is a provocative, I think, stance. It's a provocative stance because it asks us to view children as competent, to view the educator as competent, to view the parent and family as competent. And so it's a provocation in a sense, because it really asks us to consider not only what the view is of these different partners in education, but what practices are evident or not evident as a result of such a view. So that's exciting.
We know that people who come into early childhood education have great affection for children. There are lots of things that affect how we view children, and we probably would find it easy to say, well, this is what I think. But then when the rubber hits the road, we have to bring our practice into alignment with those views. So until this document, I think it was quite easy to say, well, yes, I believe children are unique and creative, but then engage in pedagogical practices that were actually contradictory to that. But now there will be a real encouragement to critically reflect, to always be looking back at what we've said we believe and now what we're doing, and to invite others to help us to think about that, to be critical friends, and that's very much in keeping with what we do here in our course. Typically, the kinds of documents that are used to guide practice in education are fairly prescriptive. They often have checklists of skills, and whether intentionally or not, those checklists end up going beyond guiding practice. They almost direct practice. And they are based on a particular view of the child, again, that is not usually articulated. We see this document as such a profound shift away.
We see it as a profound shift, particularly because we want to think of it as not a guide, not a template, but really a provocation, a question, in a sense. We want to think of it as a philosophy and an approach and a way of being. And in that way, we can work with it in so many contexts to provoke conversation and to play with it, because it is something to be played with, tried out. And in the university context, it is an excellent space to live, to deconstruct trouble, think about what does it mean to learn. And the document doesn't provide answers. What it does is it provides conversations so we can debate. In early childhood contexts, in schools, I think these conversations need to be had about what does it mean to learn, and what does it mean to be a learner, and who learns, and how, and all of those questions. And that's important. That's the central project.
So this really is liberating us from our certainties. And that can be a little uncomfortable. It can feel so much more reassuring, I guess, to have a list laid out for you. This is, we think, seeing educators as professionals, as very competent thinkers. Henry Giroux would say as intellectuals. And we think it's about time for that. We feel very confident that early childhood educators are more than capable of thinking in this way. So it's a matter of building confidence back when maybe that hasn't been part of what's been happening in the past while.
And in a sense, that view again of the educator is tied intimately with the view of the child. They cannot be separated. They must coexist. A competent child and a competent educator and a competent parent work together. And that's, again, exciting because it is a different view and it requires attention.
I think we're kind of maybe finally on the edge of what might be seen as some dark ages in education, where I think neoliberalism has had a really crushing impact of trying to standardize and take it away from an intellectual thing into more of a focus on skills that can be just transmitted and then tested, etc. And that, I think, has really been difficult. When what we want to do is elevate, what we want to do is explore potential and be tentative and take risks. And so this document opens up, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about it. It invites us to think. It's based on some very broad principles and foregrounds relationships. And that we feel very strongly is key, that through relationship we learn. We become who we are and the best of who we can be. And so to see a document taking that direction is so very exciting for us and energizing and challenging. And it really does leave open so much space for, as Randa was saying, these rich conversations, for challenging each other rather than a focus on compliance and conformity. It's making space for that really rich thinking.
And no one doubts and no one questions that quality is important. Mm-hmm. And it is important to examine how systems elevate notions of quality. That's important. That is something that we all aspire to, particularly when we think about the professional who is the educator. We want the best educated, the highest quality educators working with gifted children, because every child is gifted and every educator is gifted. That is important. The question becomes, what does it mean to say that someone or a context is high quality? And where do who decides what quality is, and by what measure is this quality decided? What this document does is that it might reframe the question of what is quality out from what we are complying to what we can think about as we grapple with those uncertainties of what does it mean to have high quality. And I don't know what you think.
I think that it's inviting those conversations. And so again, to not be faced with the certainty of checklists that are not responsive to context, that just proclaim that the answers are here. This is saying we have to think about this, we have to create this, it must be responsive, there must be engagement and expression. All of the things that we want for children, for their well-being, are also part of who we are and what we want in our context. And that may look different in different communities. So again, this is really thoughtful work, challenging work, but I think it's opening up that space for us to be thoughtful together rather than to just sort of buckle down and comply.
Yeah, and it reminds me, Peter Moss talks about how we need to move beyond a narrow understanding of what professionals and professionalism is. And here he's evoking broader conversations that really matter, conversations about the survival of the planet, about the survival of the dignity of children and families. He's talking about a changing context about how we think what professionalism can do for us. And I think that's important to also note, because sometimes when we think of professionalism, we confine ourselves to very narrow conversations about what it means. And these conversations can limit that intellectual work, which is what we're saying is really important. And this document allows us or enables us opens up those conversations.
Absolutely. We found it particularly interesting that the ministry decided to call this document, How Does Learning Happen? They could easily have called it How Learning Happens, which then conveys that sense of certainty as if we know. I guess it's an optimistic kind of certainty, but I think it is something to still be considered. We don't really know all the answers, that's for sure. And it's also not called a curriculum document. It's called Ontario's Pedagogy for the Early Years. Also significant that in discussing what early years means, the intention of the ministry is that this document guide pedagogy not just for early childhood education, not just into kindergarten, but beyond as well. And so we think the principles here are so rich and so lovely that they can certainly follow the educators and children right on through. They'll be interpreted in different ways in different contexts, and it's inviting that conversation by the very fact that it's a question. And we just celebrate, again, I think it's a courageous document. I think it's inspiring. It is going to rock the boat. It is a different direction, but we are confident that when educators have that opportunity to think deeply about these things, that they won't want to go back to a more compliance-based approach.